Hi, welcome to Backstage, where we delve into the creative process with talented artists. Today, we are going to be talking with director Tony Pisculli. Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. We've talked several times before on previous iterations of Backstage and Center Stage, and I'm really happy to have this conversation really focused on your directorial process.
Sure. That's a big question. So, I mean, do you want to start somewhere specific?
Yes.
Or...
Oh, yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
Right.
I promise. I'll give you a little more than that. No, you just go. We've got a half hour, Tony. So let's start off with what attracts you to a script? What makes you want to say, I want to direct this show?
That's a good question, because I end up picking my scripts not because they're scripts that I want to do, but because they're scripts that fit a season. So we talked about this earlier, as we were closing in on the 12-year mark for Hawai'i Shakespeare Festival, and I've been directing nothing but Shakespeare almost exclusively for the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. And I picked a lot of things to fit the season because I was bringing in other directors, because our two co-founders were busy doing other projects. And so I wanted to, not stick our incoming directors with something that they didn't want to do, or I wanted to make sure we didn't do 3 histories in one season. But the fortunate thing is that when you're directing Shakespeare, there's really no such thing as a bad script. I mean, even the worst Shakespeare plays are wonderful. And I've never directed a Shakespeare play that I haven't fallen in love with. Even the stinkers like King John, which I love King John at this point. It's one of my favorite plays. So in terms of Shakespeare, you really could just throw a dart and pick something and be in good shape. But there are some that appeal to me more than others. And in particular, I'll talk about my choice for this season because it was interesting. I wanted to do Coriolanus this season because I wanted to do a beginner Shakespeare. This is back pre-coronavirus. And I wanted to give people who don't normally do Shakespeare an excuse to say, oh, this should be the year I should do it because it's a beginner only one. I wasn't going to cast anyone who had done Shakespeare before. So it would be an opportunity for anyone who's brand new to the theater to come out, and anyone who's been doing Manoa Valley or Diamond Head or Kumu and never felt like they could do Shakespeare, this would be their chance to give it a shot. And Coriolanus seemed well suited to that because it has a lot of big group scenes, a lot of people coming on stage together. There's a lot of support there, a lot of angry mobs shouting stuff. And there would be a lot of opportunities for interesting physical choral work.
Let's, you were just saying that you were talking about the reasons why you chose Coriolanus and that it offered an opportunity for good choral work.
Yeah. But then, with the coronavirus situation, that opportunity for physical choral work wasn't going to happen. It looks like I'm going to be doing a show online. There's a good chance that all 3 of the shows this year will be online. And the beginner only thing, this didn't seem like a good introduction for people who are brand new to Shakespeare to have to deal with this sort of technology and this unusual rehearsal situation. So I dropped that, and I'll try to bring it back another year. But the other thing I was saying was that, I just wasn't in the mood to do Coriolanus anymore. I really wanted to do a comedy. I wanted to do something light and fun and funny. And so I started looking at comedies instead. And I picked Mary Wise for a couple of reasons. One, I straight up think it's the funniest comedy that Shakespeare ever wrote. It's not often credited as that. And people think that Twelfth Night is better. I think Twelfth Night is a better play, but I don't think it's a funnier play. And Comedy of Errors usually gets put forward as a funnier play, but Comedy of Errors is you really have to bring a lot of physical humor to Comedy of Errors to make it that funny. It is a very funny play, but I think the Comedy of Mary Wise is much more rooted in character, and that was going to be more suitable for an online production. And in addition to that, it was also my very first Shakespeare play. It's the first time I worked with Terrence Knapp. It is the play where I fell in love with Shakespeare. I did it. It was my first play that I did at UH, and I've been doing Shakespeare ever since. So, and I did it 10 years ago. So it's been a while since I've looked at Mary Wives. So that was the thought process there. But that's very individual. Yeah, that's very individual to that play. But that's the sort of thinking that goes into how you pick a play is, I mean, if you're picking among the 38, 39, 37, depending on how you count Shakespeare plays, you know, really it's just a question of which one do you want to do now, because eventually you're going to do them all, right? Unless you're an educator and you just have to do Romeo and Juliet over and over. So it's really, you know, it's really more about your mood. So what's right for right now? Yeah. So that's how I think about it. What's right for the sort of experiment that I want to do. I do a lot of experimental stuff with Shakespeare. As you know, we've talked about that before. So, you know, some, like I did the Midsummer Night's Dream in Invented Language, and I really wanted a play that would support that sort of, that loss of language and still have a clear story to tell the audience. Yeah, I think that would be much, much harder with a history or a tragedy. So that sort of thing. I'm actually looking at doing comedy of errors again in a couple of years, talking to a gentleman named Ben Crystal, who he and his father are big proponents of something called OP, Original Pronunciation. And they have recreated the way that Shakespeare was spoken in the day that it was spoken, in Shakespeare's day. There was something right around the time of Shakespeare and shortly afterwards called the Great Vowel Shift, and a lot of the English language changed its pronunciation. And so they've gone back and recreated from a number of sources what that originally sounded like. And what that does a couple of things. It makes all the puns work again. It makes all the rhymes work again. But it also creates this really rich, resonant sound that sort of grounds the actors in their body and roots them to the earth and creates a really compelling and dynamic performance. So I was very lucky to work with him at a Shakespeare Theater Association workshop in San Francisco a number of years ago. And then we recently reconnected online. And so we're talking about bringing him out to Hawaii and doing a play in OP with HSF. And so again, for something like that, for a Hawaii audience, I want something that's going to be easy to follow because the language is going to be a little bit less accessible than it normally is. So comedy of error seems like a good choice because again, it's such a physical sort of practice. Yeah. So there's also that consideration. So what play suits the approach you're taking to the play? What play are you in the mood to direct? And what play suits the times? That's certainly relevant for a lot of people as well. And what play suits the season and our sort of our flow. You know, over the last 5 years, we don't want to repeat stuff too often. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. And then some. That's awesome. That's really exciting. I always look forward to the work that you're going to be doing, the choices that you're going to be making. I do want to say, Tony, I could hear clearly everything that you're saying. There's been a little lag in your video.
Okay.
But I don't want to lose anything that you just said, so I'm inclined not to edit that out. If there's anything running on your computer that you can bring down.
No, I'm on my iPad, so there's literally nothing else running.
Well, what the heck? It's still a good conversation, so.
Still lagging now?
Yeah, you're a little glitchy. You're like something out of The Ring.
Huh, that's disturbing.
So we think that we've solved our technical difficulty here, and we're gonna leave the glitchiness because it's just it's like more homey that way, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It's like live theater that way.
Yeah, it is actually. It is. The show must go on, Tony.
Yep.
Oh, well, there's a little behind the scenes there for you. Okay, so I'd like to step back just a little bit into that because you were talking about thinking about doing Coriolanus for beginners Shakespeare, people who have never been involved in Shakespeare before. And that makes me wonder if you generally look at a thing, a trope that you want to use, or a new method, invention with a show, and then you think about what show would fit well with that? Or do you say most often, all right, I'm going to direct this show, and what can I do with that?
I think originally, because it's been a while, I've been doing this for 19 years. So originally I would pick a play and then figure out how I best wanted to present that play. But now I'm more interested in picking a process and choosing a play that suits that process, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So early on I did, in fact, the very first season I did Two Gentlemen of Verona. And because we were doing 3 plays at the same time for the first time, and I was really worried about getting a cast, and I knew we'd have more women than men auditioning, I decided to do that as an all-female production. And then having decided that, I thought, well, I've got to approach this this is my first time doing an all-female production, and I was very nervous about it. And I thought, I have to create a concept that supports this. I can't just do it. I've got to like explain it away to the audience. And I came up with this whole world of the sort of post-gendered world where there'd been some sort of natural apocalypse, and all the men had died, and some of the women had taken on men's roles in society for various reasons, and and that all turned out to be overkill. And going forward, I just dropped that conceit entirely. But that's the sort of thing I used to do. It's like pick a play, and then how do I want to present this play? Now I've done most of the plays that I want to do. I've done about half of them, a little bit more. So I focus on what I want to do with the actors and pick a play that supports my approach. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I have seen most often from you is you are not explaining anything away. You're just jumping right in, both feet. And I love that. I think that they need no explanation, and it takes us into, art is supposed to shake the dust of everyday life off of your feet, and that really gives us a good shake.
Oh, good. I will say that I am pretty explicit in my director's notes about what I'm trying to accomplish, and a lot of audience members don't bother with the director's notes, and that is fine. I think that a production should stand on its own. If you have to justify a production in your director's notes, you've somehow failed. At the same time, I know that reviewers will go to your director's notes first, and I've had my director's notes quoted back to me in reviews. So it's very important to set expectations for reviewers. But for the audience, I think the play should stand on its own. The production should stand on its own.
Yeah. I like to read director's notes after I've seen the show. I don't want the notes to color my perception of the show.
That's good.
So I think that at this point, what I would like to do is, no matter what kind of craziness you're going to do with a show that's new and different, I imagine you have some pretty set steps that you go through in that directing process. Do you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm thinking about what those are right now, because they're all about to change for this first online production. But yeah, I have a process. It starts with the auditions. I think that you really set yourself up for success with your auditions, and then if you cast well, then most of the hard work is done. I have a sort of standard rehearsal schedule that I use, and I know that there are a lot of directors who like to start with table work, and that has never been something that I enjoy or have found effective. I find it very tedious to explore Shakespeare sitting down and reading it. I like to get the play up on its feet immediately. So usually what we'll do is very quickly we'll just leap into blocking without even talking about anything. It's just like, you're here, and if someone has a question about why am I coming in from this entrance, or what am I saying with this line, we can explore it with the actors standing there physically in the space, looking around at the people that they're interacting with. It's like, well, if we know that, you know, this person is here and this person is here, then are you saying this to this person because they're here, or because you want this other person who's listening to overhear what you're saying? That sort of thing is much more available to you when the actors are already on their feet and in the space than it is when you're just sitting around the table. This is something that Patrick, I'm losing the name, a guy who wrote a terrific book about original staging practices. He talks about a lot. And he advocates a style of production which is undirected, largely undirected. And he says that, you know, Shakespeare's plays are designed to just work. And if you just, you know, if everybody comes and shows up off book and just starts playing the play, it will reveal itself to you. And table work is kind of the opposite of that. Not that I'm opposed to other people doing table work. I know some of our other directors do, and they obviously have a terrific track record. Our Kevin is a big proponent of table work. He will sometimes work with actors for months or years in advance of putting up a new play. And he has terrific results, but it's a different process, and it's not one that works for me. So
you are going into auditions without having made decisions about what you want specific characters in your show to be like?
Yes and no. I usually have an idea. I mean, I've read the play, obviously. I'm familiar with it. I have a sense of who the characters are, but I have a sense of what I want the play to be, but I can also be flexible in that regard. So if somebody comes to me with something interesting, it's like, yeah, great, we can go in that direction. I do think, this is where I differ from original staging practices. I do think the director has a responsibility to actually direct. I think there are people who believe that everything there is to the play is in the play, and that all you have to do is get it on its feet. And I don't believe that. I'm sort of contradicting myself here because I just said that about original staging practices. But I think if you had a company like you had in Shakespeare's day where everybody was on the same page already, then great, that probably worked. But if you're putting together a company from a bunch of people who haven't worked together before, it's the director's responsibility to make sure that the choices that actors are making are, yes, still true to the script and to the play, but also work in a cohesive whole. So you might say, hey, look, I'm looking at this character and I see him as this sort of person. It's like, yeah, that's absolutely justified in the text. You can make that choice. However, this is a comedy and that's not a fun choice. That is going to drag the whole production down. Let's see if there's another true choice that's going to be funny. I see really talented directors making this mistake all the time, especially with Shakespeare's comedies, putting up a tragically unfunny production of something like Love's Labor's Lost, you know, where you can sit through 2.5 hours and not laugh once. And it's just like, what a waste, you know? And you could do that. There's a lot of tragedy in that play, and there's a lot of humanity in that play, but there's also a lot of humor in that play. And if you miss that, I think you've missed the heart of the play. So.
Yeah, well, that is, an understanding of Shakespeare, but also you could make a choice to make Love's Labor Lost a tragedy if you wanted to. Any of those shows you could twist into Midsummer Night's Dream. So tragic.
Yeah. Midsummer Night's Dream certainly has an element of The Graduate to it. That scene at the end where Ben and Elaine, they're sitting in the bus and like they're happily married, riding off in the sunset together. You're just like, no, this is not good. This is not a happy ending. Yeah. And Love's Labor's, spoiler, because we're doing Love's Labor's this season. Love's Labor's is a tragedy. Love's Labor's ends with death. It does not end with marriage. But it's funny. It's a comedy. So yeah.
Yeah.
And it's grouped with the comedies.
So you can choose how you focus. I mean, I learned as an actor the hard way that you're not signing up to do Love's Labor Lost, you are signing up to do Tony Pisculli's version of that. It really is the director who gets to make those decisions.